crimes that we feature here on Crimewatch tonight. It's the story of how detectives investigate an armed robbery at a bank in Manchester began to suspect that one of the victims, well, he wasn't quite what he seemed.
On the 17th of December 2004, a 999 call was made.
Police were called to the NatWest bank in Rusholme in Manchester. When they arrived, £200,000 was missing from the safe, and one of the employees was found bound and gagged.
Half a mile away, emergency services were called to a van on fire. Nearby, they found another member of staff who'd been tied up and was extremely distraught. Within hours, the two victims, Shazim Yousab and Angela, were interviewed, and police began to piece together the events of that morning.
Are you all right?
I met a colleague, Shazim, and picked him up, and we drove down to the bank together. There was a van parked where I normally park.
I haven't got as much room, just check me going back.
Yeah, keep going.
I heard the van door slide open, and I heard somebody jump out, heard them hit the ground. And I remember thinking, if you just wait 1 minute, I'll get out of your way. And I turned my head to tell him that. And as I looked at him, he had a gun, which he was pointing at me. I was so frightened, because I didn't know what was going to happen.
Meanwhile, Shazim was taken to the bank and ordered to empty the safe of cash.
Face down!
All I could think about was whether I was ever going to see my children again.
Angela was driven to a nearby car park.
Don't move! Detectives turned to evidence at the scene, but there was very little. No fingerprints or even witnesses. But they did have one lead.
Checks on the van revealed it had been bought from a man in Liverpool the day before the robbery. The innocent seller of the van had met the buyer at Liverpool Lime Street station. The meeting had been captured on CCTV, which meant detectives now had a good idea what the van buyer looked like. And although the buyer had pretended to get to the meeting by train, police had a hunch that he'd actually travelled there from Manchester by car.
I took the view that if I was to look at the CCTV on the main routes out of Manchester to Liverpool on the day of the purchase, there was every chance that vehicle would have stopped and perhaps filled up with petrol. And if that was the case, that would have been captured on CCTV.
The detectives' hunch paid off. After 5 days of trawling through CCTV, officers spotted the man they recognised as the van buyer filling up a car at a service station. His name was Imran Hasham, and the car he was driving was registered to his father. With him was his brother, Munir Hasham. Police again visited bank staff. Shortly afterwards, Imran Hasham took an unexpected trip to Kenya.
Was it a coincidence, or was it because he'd been tipped off by somebody? Very few people knew of the existence of the CCTV. So I then began to wonder, is this an inside job, and had he been tipped off by somebody from the bank?
In an incredible twist to the story, police discovered the unthinkable. Shazim Yousab, their victim at the bank, was actually related to their prime suspects, Munir and Imran Hasham. He was their brother-in-law.
And police became even more suspicious when Shazim announced that he too was off to Kenya to recuperate from his ordeal.
But detectives didn't want to act too soon. They needed more evidence before revealing what they knew. So they kept up the pretense that Shazim was entirely innocent.
We had to give the impression that we still believed him to be a victim, that the investigation was still going on. And we still kept him informed, even when he was in Kenya via his manager at the bank, how the investigation was going on. But obviously we had to be a bit careful about what we said.
Thinking the heat was off, Munir Hasham remained in the country.
He was being watched very closely by my colleagues. It also became clear as well that he had a new interest, which was shopping.
The suit you've got on is £350.
No problem. Munir was suddenly flush, even buying a brand new Audi A3 with cash.
Although we had suspects, we didn't have enough to start making arrests. And so we sought the assistance of Crimewatch.
Hello, and as well as great Manchester detectives.
On the night of the programme, surveillance officers were following Munir.
And significantly, at 5 to 9, 5 minutes before the broadcast was due to go out, he was seen to go to a friend's house and watch the programme itself.
Big news this evening, Rusholme, in the papers again tonight. Word is on the street this was an inside job, inside job, inside job.
The second Crimewatch finished, Munir left the flat and we followed him straight to the bank employee's house, Shazim's Usman.
The fact that Munir went to Shazim's house provided the first concrete link between the two men and the robbery. When Munir emerged, he was carrying several bags. Police became even more suspicious.
Now, we don't really know what was in them carry bags. I suggest it may have been money from the bank. It may well have been some of Shazim's share of the money from the bank. And it may be that the showing of the programme caused Munir such concern that he went round to the bank employee's house, his brother-in-law, and removed evidence.
I became very interested in Munir's friend, the blackmail, the one who I believed he'd watched the Crimewatch programme with. And because of that, I decided to put him under surveillance too.
Police secretly filmed him and discovered that he too had recently bought an Audi A3 from a garage in Cheshire.
The garage had insisted that he parted with his driving licence so they could verify who he was, and they took a photocopy of this.
I believe you got some documentation for us.
Yeah, right.
So we were pleased to find out that the garage still had this photocopy, which showed us a photograph of this individual, and one better than that was in fact his name.
Yeah, that's it.
And that name was Daniel Cordell Stevens.
Daniel Cordell Stevens had worked with Munir as a bouncer at various Manchester nightclubs. He also had a history of assault. Finally, police were ready to make their arrests.
The date for the arrest was set, and that was the 17th of February. And that was 2 months to the date after the actual bank robbery. We had 8 premises to search, and we got warrants for each of those premises. And we used in excess of 150 officers.
But it was at Munir's house that police found the biggest surprise.
He didn't initially answer the door, so we had to force entry. We found Munir in there, and he was arrested on suspicion of carrying out the bank robbery. We also found within his flat a black suitcase which matched the description that had been used in the robbery. We found a quantity of cash also in there.
Just as police were leaving, the washing machine finished its cycle. Officers checked inside and found another bundle of cash. Munir's attempt to hide the evidence had failed. With all of the culprits arrested, police took them in for questioning. Daniel Cordell Stevens didn't have much to say.
The man who got out of the van held a gun to the navel of the lady who was kidnapped. Was that you, Danny?
Shazim, on the other hand, was happy to comment. He blamed Munir.
He was the one who started the discussion. He said, I want to rob NatWest and Rusholme. It came to a point when I said to him, there is no way I'm going to let you rob the bank. He stopped, he told me, listen, you have it my way or the highway.
But Shazim's excuses didn't wash. The case went to trial at Manchester Crown Court, where Shazim changed his tune and pleaded guilty for his part as the inside man at the bank. He was sentenced to 12 years. The judge called him a born liar. Munir Hasham and Daniel Cordell Stevens pleaded not guilty, but were found guilty of kidnap and armed robbery. They were given 15 years each. Imran Hasham was tried on his return from Kenya. He got 10 years for conspiracy to commit robbery.
Others involved were charged with money laundering, but most satisfyingly, thanks to some smart detective work and an appeal on Crimewatch, the 4 ringleaders were now safely behind bars.
What about that? So Matthew, the insider, how on earth did you think you'd get away with it?
Well, it was almost the perfect bank job. No witnesses, no forensics, no traceable cash. And Shazim looked like he was the perfect employee. In fact, he won Employee of the Year at the bank the year before. But as the insider, he was telling the gang the best day in the run up to Christmas, when the bank would have the most cash, where the CCTV cameras were, when him and Angelo were on their own at the branch as a victim. Well, he played that role really, really well. So on the face of it, really convincing.
Now, you used the H word, the hunch words, that, I mean, any detective will tell you that's just nonsense. You know, being a good a policeman or woman is about methodical, systemised checks.
Yeah, in modern investigations, they have a lot of checks and balances to avoid going up a blind alley, but here the hunt was absolutely bang on. The lead detective just had this feeling that the guy buying the getaway car was lying. He'd also spotted that he had a rather distinctive hooked chin, so he pulled in every CCTV camera from Manchester to Liverpool. It's a colossal task, potentially thousands of hours of footage. But there, after a week, bingo, the guy with the hooked chin pops up. They identify him. He's related to Shazim at the bank, and that's just too much of a coincidence. And from that moment on, this investigation is really rolling.
What about the wad of cash in the washing machine? I'm damned if I'm going to be the one that makes the bad joke about this.
Yeah, loads of jokes about money laundering.
Obviously.
Actually, it was just him panicking when the door came in when the police arrived, throwing it in the first place you could think of. Actually, the police did get the guys that were laundering the money. One guy had 64 grand under the bank, but real satisfaction that actually they'd taken out of action an armed, dangerous gang. They're off the streets.
Thanks, Matthew. Now, here's Rav with